I'm Ava, 28 female. I live a quiet life in a small city, working as an archivist, which is a profession that perfectly suits my personality. My days are spent with history, preserving the delicate paper trails of lives lived long ago, and my evenings are usually spent with a book and a cup of tea. It's a peaceful, orderly existence, and I've always cherished it. But that order was shattered when a final, incredible gift from my beloved uncle brought my parents' true nature crashing down upon me, forcing me to build a fortress around my inheritance and my heart. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The call came on a Tuesday, a day so gray and unremarkable that its memory is now seared into my mind in stark contrast to the news it delivered. The caller was a woman with a voice like polished mahogany, smooth, professional, and somber. It was my Uncle Ben's estate lawyer, a name I'd heard him mention but had never met. She informed me, with practiced gentleness, that my uncle had passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 nights prior. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Uncle Ben, my mother's older brother, had been more of a father to me than my own. He was the one who encouraged my love of history, who taught me how to skip stones on the ocean, and whose booming laughter was the soundtrack to my happiest childhood memories. He was my rock, my confidant, and my hero. Tears blurred my vision as the lawyer continued. The funeral would be a small, private affair, as per his wishes, but the reason for her call was the will. He had, she explained, left me something significant. She asked if I could come to her office on Friday to discuss the details. I agreed in a daze, the rest of the conversation a meaningless hum in my ears. The word, significant, barely registered. What could be more significant than the man himself, who was now gone? When I told my parents, Eleanor and Robert, their reaction was strange. My mother, an interior designer who valued aesthetics above all else, offered a few clipped sentences of condolence before immediately asking, "Did he mention his finances? He was always so private." My father, a financial advisor who saw the world in spreadsheets and profit margins, nodded in agreement. Ben was a savvy man. He must have built up a nice little nest egg with those seaside cafes of his. There was a glint in their eyes, a predatory curiosity that made my skin crawl. I mumbled that I didn't know, that I was just grieving, and retreated into myself. Friday came, and I found myself sitting in a leather chair across from Ms. Evelyn Reed, the lawyer. Her office was immaculate, overlooking the city harbor, a view Ben would have loved. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of unshakable competence. She handed me a tissue before she even began, a small gesture of kindness that nearly broke me. She spoke of Ben's respect and love for me, how he admired my quiet strength and independence. Then she slid a large folder across the desk. "Ben was very clear in his instructions," she said, her voice softening. "He has left his entire residual estate to you, Ava. That includes his portfolio, his savings, and his primary residence." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "He left you the beach house." I stared at her. The beach house. It wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary. Perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, it was a beautiful structure of weathered cedar and glass that Ben had designed and helped build himself. It was where he'd hosted me for entire summers, where we'd had long talks on the sprawling deck, and where the scent of salt and pine was embedded in every wall. It was the physical embodiment of my uncle's spirit. It was priceless to me, but I knew it had a very real, very high price tag. Real estate in that area was astronomical. Ms. Reed confirmed it, giving me a valuation that made my head spin: $1.5 million. The lawyer explained the next steps: the deed transfer, the probate process, the keys. I was the sole heir. My parents were not mentioned in the will, save for a small, fixed sum of money left to my mother, his sister, which felt more like an obligation than a gift. "Ben was very specific about that," Ms. Reed added, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "He wanted to ensure you, and only you, were the beneficiary of his life's work." That evening, I drove to the beach house. The keys Ms. Reed had given me felt heavy in my hand. Letting myself in, I was met with the familiar, comforting silence. Everything was just as Ben had left it. A half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, his favorite worn armchair angled toward the ocean view, a photograph of a 10-year-old me, grinning with a missing front tooth on the mantel. A wave of grief and gratitude washed over me so powerfully that my knees buckled. I sank onto the floor and wept for my loss, for his overwhelming generosity, for the future he had given me. When I finally called my parents to tell them the specifics, the silence on the other end of the line was thick and heavy. "The whole house?" Elinor finally asked, her voice tight. "And his investments?" "Yes," I said simply. "Well," my father chimed in, his tone falsely cheerful. "That's a lot for a young woman to handle, a big responsibility. We'll have to come down and help you get things in order." I didn't like the sound of that. It wasn't an offer, it was a declaration. It was the sound of them seeing not a home, but a commodity, not a gift, but a jackpot. In that moment, sitting on the floor of my beautiful new home, a cold seed of dread was planted in my heart. The house was a final gift from the sea, from my wonderful uncle, but I was beginning to realize it had come with a storm attached. And that storm was my own parents. The first week was a whirlwind of logistics. I took a leave of absence from my job at the archives and began the slow, painful process of sorting through my uncle's belongings. Each object held a memory, every book a story he'd shared. It was emotionally draining, but it was also a way of saying goodbye. I decided to move into the house immediately. It felt right. My small apartment in the city suddenly felt confining and gray compared to the vast, open expanse of sky and sea that the beach house offered. This was home now. My parents, true to their word, announced they were coming to help. They arrived the following Saturday in my father's polished sedan, armed with overnight bags and a stack of my mother's interior design magazines. The dread I'd felt on the phone intensified into a low, thrumming anxiety. "Oh, darling, this place has such potential," Elinor declared, sweeping into the living room and running a critical eye over Ben's comfortable, slightly worn furniture. "But it's so dated. We'll need to open up this wall, get some modern pieces in here. A lighter color palette would do wonders." She spoke as if she were a consultant and I was a client, not as if she were in her late brother's home, a home that was now mine. My father, Robert, was no better. He walked the property with a practiced eye, not admiring the view but assessing the value. "Good bluff stability," he noted, tapping the deck railing. "The zoning here is restrictive, which is excellent for resale value. Have you had an independent appraisal done yet, Ava? The estate's valuation might be low for tax purposes." Every word was a small jab, a subtle undermining of my ownership. They weren't there to help me settle in, they were there to stake a claim. Over the next 2 days, their help became a full-blown invasion. My mother started moving furniture around, creating little piles of things she deemed tacky or clutter. It included a hand-carved decoy Duck Ben had cherished and a collection of old sea glass we'd gathered together. I quietly moved them back when she wasn't looking, my heart aching with a mixture of grief and anger. My father kept trying to sit me down for a financial planning session. He brought charts and printouts about capital gains tax, property management costs, and investment strategies. "The smartest play here, Ava, would be to liquidate," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Sell the house, invest the proceeds in a diversified portfolio under my management. You'd be set for life. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." "I'm not selling," I said firmly, for what felt like the 10th time. "Uncle Ben wanted me to live here. This is my home." He sighed, a theatrical display of paternal disappointment. "You're being emotional, sweetheart. This is a financial asset, a massive one. You can't think of it like it's your childhood dollhouse." The condescension was suffocating. They treated me like a child who had stumbled upon a winning lottery ticket and was too foolish to know what to do with it. They never asked me how I was feeling or shared a fond memory of Ben. Their entire focus was on the house, the money, and how they could get their hands on it. The more I asserted my decisions, the more they ramped up the pressure. The breaking point came on Sunday evening. I was in the kitchen making tea when my mother came in, holding a brochure for a luxury condo development downtown. "I was just thinking," she began, her tone light and airy, "this house is so big for just one person. You'd be so much more comfortable in a place like this. All the amenities, none of the upkeep. We could sell this place, get you a beautiful condo, and there would be plenty left over for your father, and I too, manage for the future." "Manage for your future, you mean?" I said, my voice colder than I intended. Elinor's smile tightened. "Don't be difficult, Ava. We're your parents. We know WH. At's best for you. Your uncle was a lovely man, but he was sentimental. He didn't understand the burden a property like this can be." A burden? They saw this incredible gift, this sanctuary, as a burden. The poison in her welcome was no longer subtle. It was a tangible thing, fouling the air between us. I looked at her, at the perfectly coiffed hair and the expensive silk blouse, and I saw a stranger. I saw a woman whose greed was so profound it had completely eclipsed any maternal instinct, any grief for her own brother. "The only burden," I said, setting my mug down with a clatter, "is this conversation. The house is mine. It is not for sale, and it is not going to be managed by either of you. This discussion is over." The mask of concern dropped from her face, replaced by a flash of pure fury. It was a look I'd seen before, but never directed at me with such intensity. It was the look of a predator whose prey was refusing to be cornered. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen. A moment later, I heard her speaking to my father in low, angry tones in the other room. They left shortly after, the goodbyes clipped and frosty. As their car's taillights disappeared down the long driveway, a chilling thought solidified in my mind. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. They hadn't been testing the waters, they had been probing for weaknesses. And they had found none, which meant their next move would be far more aggressive. The poisoned welcome had ended, and I knew a war was about to begin. The silence that descended upon the house after my parents left was a relief, but it was heavy with foreboding. The peace I had felt in the first few days was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. I started locking the doors obsessively, even when I was just out on the deck. Every passing car on the distant coastal road made me jump. They had made me feel like an intruder in my own home. A week went by. It was a week of unsettling quiet. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. I knew this wasn't a retreat. It was them regrouping, planning their next assault. I tried to focus on my tasks, sorting through Ben's workshop, organizing his vast collection of books. But my parents' parting glares were imprinted on my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped the following Tuesday. I was on the back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple when their car pulled into the driveway. My stomach twisted into a knot. They didn't get out right away. They just sat in the car for a moment, and I could see their silhouettes talking, gesturing. When they finally emerged, their faces were set like stone. There were no fake smiles this time, no pretense of help. They walked up the steps to the deck, with the purposeful stride of people on a hostile mission. My mother, Elinor, was the one who spoke. She had a smirk on her face, a look of such smug triumph that it made me feel physically ill. "Hello, Ava. We thought we'd give you a bit of time to come to your senses, but it seems you're determined to be difficult." "There's nothing to come to my senses about," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic hammering of my heart. "I made my decision." My father, Robert, scoffed. "You made an emotional, childish decision. But don't worry, we've taken steps to correct it. We've protected you from your own foolishness." I just stared at them, confused. "What are you talking about?" Elinor's smirk widened. She looked like a cat who had not only cornered the canary but had already swallowed it. "We had the deed transferred into our names. We spoke to a lawyer who understands these things. Ben was clearly not in his right mind when he left everything to you. A man of his wealth, cutting out his only sister? It's a classic case of undue influence. It was easy to argue. The house is legally ours now." The world tilted again, just as it had on the day I learned Ben was gone. But this was different. This was a dizzying, nauseating spin of betrayal. You can't just do that," I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and useless in my mouth. The will was clear, Ms. Reed said. Oh, your little lawyer, my father interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. She'll be receiving a notice from our legal counsel tomorrow. It's already done. The paperwork has been filed. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me as the last of the sun dipped below the horizon. We're being generous, Ava. We're not going to just throw you out on the street tonight. You have until Friday to pack your things and leave. You're out by Friday. I looked from his cold, impassive face to my mother's gloating one. They were serious. They had gone behind my back and, through some lie or legal trickery I couldn't comprehend, had seized my home. The pain was so sharp, so intense, it was like a physical blow. It wasn't about the house anymore or the money. It was about this, the casual cruelty. The absolute conviction that they were entitled to what was mine, that my feelings, my wishes, and my uncle's final request were nothing more than minor obstacles to be bulldozed. And in that moment of profound hurt, a memory of my uncle surfaced, crystal clear. We were sitting on this very deck years ago. I was a teenager, upset about something my parents had done, some promise they'd broken, some boundary they'd crossed. Ben had listened patiently and then said, "Your parents love you, Ava, but their ambition has a way of blinding them. They see what they want, and they convince themselves they have a right to it. When they get that look in their eyes, the one that says they know best, don't argue. Don't fight. Just go quiet, let them think they've won, and protect yourself. Protect yourself." As I looked at their triumphant faces, Ben's voice echoed in my mind. Don't argue. Let them think they've won. Something inside me shifted. The panic receded, replaced by an icy calm. The archivist in me, the part that dealt in facts and evidence and quiet procedure, took over. I knew something they didn't. I had already protected myself. So I did something that completely threw them off. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, quiet lift at the corners of my mouth. I looked at them, my heart a frozen stone in my chest, and I held their gaze. Their own smiles faltered, a flicker of confusion in their eyes. They had expected tears, pleading anger. They had expected a fight. They didn't know what to do with this quiet compliance. Okay, I said softly. Eleanor blinked. Okay, what do you mean, okay? Okay, I repeated. I'll be out by Friday. Now they looked truly baffled. This was too easy. My father narrowed his eyes, searching my face for a trick, but I kept my expression placid, serene, even. I had let them think they'd won. They had laid their trap, and now I was letting them believe I had walked right into it. Good, Robert said finally, though he still sounded uncertain. That's a smart girl. We'll be back on Friday afternoon with the agent and some potential buyers to do a walkthrough. We want this place on the market immediately. Don't leave a mess. They turned and walked away, casting confused glances back at me. They got in their car and drove off, leaving me alone on the darkening deck. As soon as they were gone, my smile vanished and the calm shattered. A single, hot tear traced a path down my cheek. They had no idea what they had done, and they had no idea what I had done. Friday was coming, but it wouldn't be an eviction. It would be a reckoning. My calm composure in front of my parents was a facade, but it was built on a foundation of solid rock. A foundation that had been laid just 3 days after I first met with Ms. Evelyn Reed. The memory was now my anchor in this storm of betrayal. After that initial meeting, as I sat in the beach house surrounded by Ben's memory, his words of warning from my teenage years kept replaying in my head. Protect what's yours from those who feel entitled to it. He had never named my parents, but he didn't have to. He knew them. He knew his own sister. He knew their insatiable hunger for more status, more money, more control. He had seen how they treated me, with a kind of possessive ownership, as if I were an extension of their own ambitions rather than my own person. Leaving me the house wasn't just a gift, it was a test and a final lesson in self-preservation. So the following Monday, I had called Ms. Reed. I have a concern, I said, my voice low. It's about my parents. They believe they have a right to this property, and I don't think they'll accept my decision to keep it. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I heard the faint sound of a pen tapping on a desk. "Your uncle anticipated this," Ms. Reed said, her voice dropping into a more confidential tone. "He left a separate letter with me to be shared with you at your discretion. It outlines his concerns about your parents' financial history and what he called their moral flexibility. He suggested a specific course of action if you felt threatened." A wave of love and sorrow washed over me. Even from beyond the grave, Ben was looking out for me. "What did he suggest?" I asked. "He suggested you place the property into an irrevocable trust immediately," she explained. "It's a legal entity that would own the house. You would be the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary. Once the asset is in the trust, it is completely shielded. It cannot be sold, transferred, or leveraged by anyone but you acting as trustee. It essentially makes you and the house legally bulletproof." She went on to explain the details. An irrevocable trust was, as the name implied, permanent. It couldn't be easily undone. It would mean that legally, Ava the person no longer owned the house. The Ava Thompson Trust owned the house. Any attempt to transfer the deed from my personal name would be null and void, because the deed was no longer in my personal name. It was an ironclad defense. "Let's do it," I said without a moment's hesitation. The process was swift. Ms. Reed was incredibly efficient. She drew up the trust documents, and I spent an afternoon in her office signing a mountain of paperwork. We filed the new deed, the one transferring ownership from Ben Carter to me, and then immediately filed the second deed, transferring ownership from Ava Thompson to the Ava Thompson Trust. It was all done legally, officially, and recorded with the county clerk's office within a week of me inheriting the house. It was all finished before my parents had even made their first, helpful visit. Now, sitting on the deck after they delivered their ultimatum, the memory of that day in Ms. Reed's office was a source of immense strength. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had pulled off a clever legal maneuver, likely by hiring a predatory lawyer who was willing to argue that Ben was senile and I had somehow coerced him. They had probably forged some documents or told a mountain of lies to a judge. But it didn't matter. Whatever fraudulent deed they had managed to acquire was a worthless piece of paper. They had transferred a title from a person who was no longer the legal owner. It was like trying to sell a car you'd already sold to someone else. My first call was to Ms. Reed. I explained what had happened, my voice shaking slightly with residual anger. "They did what?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her professional voice. Then it hardened into cold anger. "That's not just unethical, that's felony fraud, forgery, fraudulent conveyance, the list is long. Robert and Alina have crossed a very dangerous line." "They told me I have until Friday to get out," I said. "They're bringing buyers for a walkthrough." Ms. Reed was silent for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her sharp legal mind. "Good," she said finally, the single word laced with steel. "Let them. Don't tell them anything. Let them walk right into it. Can you be available at the house on Friday at, say, 3:00 p.m.? "Yes, that's when they said they'd be here," I confirmed. "Excellent," she said. "I will be there as well. I will bring all the relevant documentation for the trust. We're not going to just defend Ava. We are going to let them expose themselves completely in front of witnesses. Do exactly as they say. Pack some boxes. Make it look like you're preparing to leave. The harder they fall, the less likely they are to ever bother you again." Hanging up the phone, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The path forward was clear. My uncle had given me the house, but he had also given me the tools to protect it. My parents thought they were dealing with the quiet, compliant daughter they had always known. They had no idea I was an archivist. I dealt in provenance, in primary sources, in unshakable chains of evidence. They had built their case on lies and arrogance. I had built mine on notarized signatures and legal fact. Their foundation was sand. Mine was granite, and on Friday the tide was coming in. The next 2 days were some of the longest and most surreal of my life. Following Ms. Reed's advice, I began to stage my surrender. I went to a local store and bought a stack of moving boxes. I started packing up things I knew I would keep, but I did it in the most visible rooms of the house, the living room, and the kitchen. I left the curtains open, allowing anyone driving by to see the stacks of cardboard and the signs of a household being dismantled. It felt like building a set for a play, with the final act scheduled for Friday afternoon. My parents, of course, couldn't resist checking in. My mother called on Wednesday morning, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Just calling to see how you're doing with the packing, dear. Do you need any help? I know this must be so difficult for you." The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. "I'm managing," I said, keeping my voice flat and dejected. "It's a lot to get through." "Well, just focus on your personal things," she said brightly. "Don't worry about the furniture. The stagers will handle all of that once you're out. The agent wants the house on the market by Monday." Stagers, the agent, they were so far ahead in their own minds, already spending the money from the sale. The arrogance was breathtaking. It fueled the cold fire in my belly. My father sent a text on Thursday evening, just a reminder, 3 p.m. tomorrow. "Please be ready to hand over the keys and vacate the property promptly. Let's keep this civil." Civil, as if orchestrating a fraudulent seizure of their grieving daughter's inheritance was a civil act. Every communication from them was another piece of evidence, another testament to their character that I filed away in my mind. I spent the time. Not just packing, but also preparing myself emotionally. I walked the beach, letting the rhythmic crash of the waves soothe my frayed nerves. I sat in Ben's armchair, looking out at the endless ocean, and spoke to him in my head. I told him what was happening, and I promised him I would not fail. I would protect his legacy. I would protect my home. This house was more than just an asset, it was a testament to a life well lived. Ben had poured his soul into it. He had hosted countless friends, thrown summer parties, and spent quiet winters reading by the fire. It was a place of warmth, generosity, and peace. My parents saw it as nothing more than a bundle of cash. They wanted to strip it of its soul, sell it to the highest bidder, and move on. The thought of them succeeding was unbearable. By Friday morning, the stage was set. Boxes were neatly stacked. A few suitcases sat by the front door. The house looked sad, as if it too were mourning this supposed departure. I felt a pang of guilt for the deception, for making this happy place look so desolate, but I knew it was necessary. At 2:45 p.m., I saw a car pull into the long driveway. It wasn't my parents'. It was a sleek, black SUV. Ms. Evelyn Reed stepped out, looking every bit the powerhouse lawyer she was in a tailored navy blue suit. She carried a handsome leather portfolio under her arm. "Good afternoon, Ava," she said, her expression calm and unreadable. "Are you ready?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "As I'll ever be." "Good," she said. "Remember, say nothing. Let me handle everything from the moment I enter. They've committed a serious crime, and they are about to confess to it in front of multiple witnesses. Just stand back and let the show begin." She came inside, and we stood in the living room, surrounded by the prop boxes. We didn't have to wait long. At precisely 3:00 p.m., my parents' car appeared, followed by another, more modest sedan. My parents got out, beaming. My mother was dressed in a chic, expensive-looking outfit, ready to play the role of lady of the manor. My father had a folder of his own, likely filled with comps and financial projections. A well-dressed couple, presumably the buyers, got out of the other car, looking around at the property with excited smiles. My heart hammered against my ribs as they walked up the path. This was it. The countdown was over. Through the large picture window, I saw my mother catch sight of the stacked boxes. A smug, satisfied smirk spread across her face. She turned to the buyers and said something, gesturing grandly toward the house. They all laughed. They were laughing at my expense, celebrating their victory on my doorstep. Ms. Reed placed a calm hand on my arm. "Deep breath, Ava. Justice is at the door." I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and waited for the sound of the key in the lock, the key I was supposed to hand over. The confrontation was no longer a future event. It was here. It was now, and I was ready. The front door swung open, and my parents entered with a flourish, as if they were welcoming guests into their own home. Elinor's eyes swept over the stacked boxes, her smirk widening as she took in my somber expression. "Ah, good, you're nearly ready," she said, her voice loud enough for the prospective buyers, a couple in their late 40s, to hear. "Ava, these are the Millers. They're very interested in the property. We were just telling them about our vision for the place." The Millers smiled politely at me, a touch of awkwardness in their eyes. They clearly thought they were walking into a simple, albeit slightly sad, family real estate transaction. My father, Robert, stepped forward, all business. "We'll just need the keys from you before we start the official walkthrough, Ava. The agent is meeting us here in an hour to get the listing finalized." He held out his hand, expectant. I didn't move. I simply looked past him, toward the hallway where Ms. Reed stood, just out of their initial line of sight. This was the moment. The air was thick with tension, with my parents' arrogant certainty and my own silent, trembling anticipation. As if on cue, Ms. Evelyn Reed stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway into the bright, sunlit living room. She moved with a silent, deliberate grace that immediately commanded attention. In her sharp suit, holding her leather portfolio, she was an unexpected and jarring presence in their perfectly orchestrated scene. My parents froze. Their smiles vanished, replaced by identical masks of confusion and alarm. My mother's face went slack, and the color began to drain from my father's cheeks. "Who are you?" Robert demanded, his voice suddenly losing its confident swagger. Ms. Reed didn't look at him. She looked at the Millers, offering them a small, professional smile. "My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Evelyn Reed. Before you go any further, I feel it's my legal and ethical duty to inform you that this property is not for sale." The Millers exchanged a bewildered look. My father took a step forward, sputtering. "What are you talking about? Of course it's for sale. We are the owners. This is just my daughter, the former resident." Ms. Reed finally turned her cool, assessing gaze on him. "Is that so? Then you must be Robert and Elinor Thompson. I'm the legal counsel for the owner of this property." "We are the owners," Elinor snapped, her voice high and shrill. She had regained a sliver of her composure, fueled by indignation. "We have the deed. It was legally transferred." "Ah, yes. The deed," Ms. Reed said, her voice dangerously calm. She opened her portfolio and produced a document. "I have a copy of the deed you filed right here, the one that transfers ownership from Ava Thompson to you. Is this the document you're referring to?" My father puffed out his chest. "It is. It's all perfectly legal. Now, if you'll excuse us." "I'm afraid it's not," Ms. Reed said, cutting him off cleanly. "You see, the deed you filed is a fraudulent document. It's worthless." A shocked silence filled the room. The Millers looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. That's a lie," Elinor stammered. "Is it?" Ms. Reed continued, her voice as sharp and cold as ice. "The problem with your fraudulent deed is a matter of timing and legal precedence. At the time you filed this document, attempting to transfer the property from Ava Thompson was no longer the legal owner of the property." She pulled a second document from her portfolio. "This," she announced to the room, "is a certified copy of the deed of transfer, filed and recorded 3 weeks ago, transferring title of this property to the Ava Thompson Trust, an irrevocable legal entity. The trust is the owner. My client Ava is the sole trustee. Therefore, you filed a document to take property from someone who didn't own it. In the eyes of the law, that is a criminal act." My father went pale. Utterly, deathly pale. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. My mother stared at the document in Ms. Reed's hand, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. Ms. Reed wasn't finished. She turned her attention back to the terrified Millers. "I would strongly advise you to sever any and all business dealings with these two individuals. They have attempted to sell you a property they do not own, which constitutes fraud. You have been brought here under false pretenses." The husband, Mr. Miller, nodded quickly, grabbing his wife's arm. We're sorry. We had no idea. We're leaving." They practically fled the house, scurrying to their car as if escaping a burning building. Now it was just the four of us. The smug conquerors and their quiet victim, and the woman who had just dismantled their entire world with 2 pieces of paper. You tricked us," my mother whispered, her voice trembling with rage. She was looking at me now, pure hatred in her eyes. "You little snake." "You tried to steal my home," I replied, my own voice finally finding its strength. "You tried to steal my uncle's final gift to me. I just protected it." Ms. Reed snapped her portfolio shut with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "The crime you have committed is called fraudulent conveyance, and it carries severe penalties, including significant fines and potential prison time. You knowingly filed a falsified legal document with the intent to deprive the rightful owner of their asset. Given your professions, a financial advisor and an interior designer, a felony conviction would mean the end of your careers. You would lose everything." She let that hang in the air, a threat so potent it was almost a physical presence. My parents stood there, stripped of their arrogance, their scheme unveiled and shattered around them. They were no longer powerful figures of authority. They were just 2 greedy, foolish people who had been caught. The paper tiger had been revealed, and all that was left was the pathetic, whimpering reality. The aftermath of the unveiling was a landscape of ruins. My parents' confident world had been leveled in under 5 minutes. Robert stood slumped against the wall, his face ashen, looking decades older. Eleanor, after her brief flash of hatred toward me, had collapsed into a state of shocked, whimpering disbelief. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Ms. Reed, ever the consummate professional, pressed her advantage. She had not come merely to expose them, she had come to end this permanently. She placed her portfolio on the coffee table and produced one final set of documents and a pen. "You have 2 options," she stated, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "Option 1 is that I walk out of this house and immediately file a report with the district attorney's office. I will present them with the fraudulent deed, this timeline of events, and a recommendatio. And to pursue criminal charges to the fullest extent of the law. I assure you, they will be very interested." She paused, letting the horror of that sink in. I watched my father visibly flinch. His entire life was built on a reputation of financial trustworthiness. A criminal charge, let alone a conviction, would be a death sentence for his career. "Option 2, Ms. Reed continued, sliding the papers and the pen across the table, "is that you sign this." My father looked at the document with dread-filled eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It is a legally binding agreement," she explained. "In it, you admit that your claim to this property was based on false pretenses and is null and void. You relinquish any and all future claims, real or imagined, to this property or any other asset belonging to my client, Ava Thompson, or her trust. Furthermore, you agree to a permanent restraining order. You will not contact Ava in any way, no calls, no texts, no emails, no third-party communication, and you will not come within 500 yards of her or this property. Ever again." Her eyes were like chips of granite. "You will sign this, you will walk out of that door, and you will disappear from Ava's life forever. In exchange for your complete and total compliance, we will not press criminal charges. This is your only offer. It is not negotiable. You have 5 minutes to decide." The choice was no choice at all. It was ruin versus exile. My mother began to sob quietly, a pathetic, defeated sound. My father, the financial advisor, was clearly doing a rapid cost-benefit analysis in his head. On one side, his pride. On the other, his entire livelihood, his reputation, his freedom. It didn't take him long. He stumbled forward and picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely sign his name. He pushed the papers toward my mother. "Eleanor, sign it." She looked up, her face a mess of tears and mascara. She looked at me, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes, as if searching for a glimmer of the daughter she thought she could control. I met her gaze and felt nothing. The well of emotion I had for her, love, frustration, anger, hurt, had finally run dry. There was nothing left but a vast, quiet emptiness. I gave her no response. I just waited. With a final, shuddering sob, she signed the document. Ms. Reed took the papers, reviewed the signatures, and placed them carefully back into her portfolio. "My work here is done," she said. "The restraining order will be filed with the court by the end of the day. A copy will be served to you at your home address. I suggest you be gone before I leave." She turned to me and gave me a firm, reassuring nod. "Call me if you need anything at all, Ava." And with that, she walked out, leaving me alone with the two people who were now legally mandated strangers. They didn't look at me as they left. They gathered their shattered dignity and walked out the door in silence. They got into their car, the same one they had arrived in so full of triumph, and drove away down the long driveway for the very last time. I watched until their car was just a speck in the distance, disappearing from my life. When they were gone, I locked the door and leaned against it, the silence of the house rushing in to fill the void they had left. The stacked boxes, the props for a play that had reached its stunning conclusion, seemed to mock the quiet. Slowly, methodically, I began to unpack. I put Ben's books back on the shelves. I placed the sea glass collection back on the windowsill. I moved his favorite armchair back to its rightful place overlooking the ocean. With each action, I was not just unpacking boxes. I was reclaiming my home, cleansing it of their toxic presence. That evening, I took a blanket out to the deck and watched the stars come out, a vast, glittering canopy over the dark, murmuring sea. The battle was over. The victory was mine, but it was a hollow, painful thing. I had lost my parents. But the truth was, I had lost them long ago. I just hadn't been willing to admit it. My uncle had known. He had given me this house, this beautiful gift, but he had also given me the strength to fight for it. And in doing so, the freedom from a relationship that would have slowly destroyed me. The echoes of the confrontation faded, replaced by the gentle, timeless sound of the waves on the shore. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was a quiet, solitary peace, but it was mine. It was real. And in my house by the sea, I was finally, truly home.